I am muted. Welcome everyone to the 12 Bryans of Christmas. Beers, and that was a terrible joke.
I'm Brian. I'm Todd Summers. I'm back for night 2. Brian, we gotta keep the show rolling. Let's open night 8 beers.
I got it. Let's.
Woo! We can do it.
Woo!
We're all right. We had a whole blog about this. We can do it.
Yeah. All right. Night 8's beer. I'm sure we have another wonderful beer for everybody. So, of course, let's switch to box cam.
And box cam.
I'm just a mess tonight. I'm just a mess.
Okay.
All right, box cam. And it looks like mine's overflowing. Oh. One.
All right.
2.
Flying Fish Brewing Company, the legends from outside of Philly, across the border in New Jersey, the absolute legends. You can go there for beer tours and fishware. I love how the classicness of this can. And Brian, it's like our fulfillment team knew what we got into last night.
They really did, because I got 3.
You got 3. I just got 1. You're worse than me.
I got 3 things of coal. I was quite banged up last night. I had trouble getting up this morning. I'm not used to doing that much. I have a young child. It's taxing.
Brian, I've got a level 2. I feel like garbage. I read the blog, which was challenging because it was like moving around. I ignored every word that was written. I've had the same hangover cure since college, where I just eat tuna fish sandwiches, which everyone laughs at me. It's worked until like right now. It's my favorite food. I didn't do anything. I don't know.
That's very disgusting. So
I'm curious. I want to know what the chat did. I want to know what the chat did to revive themselves. So Remember, just a reminder, chat is for banter. The Q&A is for questions that we're going to get into live. What are we doing tonight, Brian?
Well, tonight we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, monks in beer. We're going to get into some history about the monks. Who are they, what they have to do with beer, and the contributions of the monks in brewing. But first, let's try this Dubbel. Dubbel. Chat, what do you say? Let's assess this beer. I haven't done a beer assessment since the first night. Let's get into this thing. A Dubbel, whatever you say, is a very, specific style of beer. So, Todd, I'd love to hear your opinion.
So, my opinion on the word Dubbel is that it's difficult to say. For me, what I love about this, I'm a fruit guy, and cherry, I get it, which is sort of an uncommon fruit. Yeah. Yeah, there, Kirk said it. It's not the most common fruit to get in beer for me, for the styles that I'm usually drinking. So it's nice to have it, because I feel like it's sort of new for me. I don't have this style a ton, but when I get it and I get that cherry, I love it. It makes me really excited.
Yeah, and the cherry is really interesting character in this beer, because there's no cherries. That's all coming from the play between the malt and the fermentation character of the beer, and that's really what we're gonna get into, is what drives these Belgian beers, and who are the monks.
It's a pretty unique color.
Yes, brown but almost ruby red, almost a cherry color, cherry hue to it.
Yeah, it's like in light, it almost looks ambery, but then if I take it away from like a direct light source, it's way darker than that.
Yeah, exactly. Great taste.
Like the bottom of your glass.
Yeah, get that cherry up front. There is a nice carameliness to it as well. A really nice smooth caramel character, and yeah.
They say chocolate and molasses at the end. For me, I get the molasses like straight away at the end. Like that's very clear to me.
Lot going on in this beer. And yes, to echo Liana in the chat, does not taste like it's 7.2% alcohol. And one of my favorite things I used to say when I was getting into craft beer and I wouldn't shut up about it enough,
which has changed from now.
Yeah, exactly. Is I think the mark of a very, very good brewer is being able to hide alcohol, brewing these big beers and putting a smoothness to it that makes it so drinkable and dangerous, like Liana also said.
Yeah. This would be way less enjoyable, especially on a day like today, if at the end you were getting that boozy bite, right? That's not what we want from this beer at all.
Yeah. Ewan asked in the question, so you put the charcoal in the glass? I would not recommend that. The charcoal is for how naughty we all were last night. But
I'm gonna do art with mine.
What?
I'm gonna use mine to make artwork.
I was going to say, I remember a scene from Breaking Bad where Gus Fring eats charcoal pill because he is going to drink poison. So if you think you might be poisoned soon, eat the charcoal. The charcoal will deactivate the poison. But you also have
very
to have
different association to charcoal than mine.
That's the first thing that came to mind.
That's why.
Big Breaking Bad fan. Throw it up in the chat. Favorite season of Breaking Bad. Also, chat, what are you thinking about this beer? We've heard hiding its alcohol well. The Keller's a little over there. We want to hear your opinions. Kate, are you there?
I'm here, Brian.
Everybody say hey to
guys.
Kate again. Kate will be moderating the chat, helping us out with some Q&As. But Todd, let's get further into it. It's a beautiful can. I just saw you pull up that can. I think this is the first time I've ever seen this beer in a can. I've seen it in a bottle a bunch.
Yeah. That's a sign of the times, right? We're going to get it a little more into sort of beer trends in a couple of nights, but
is that a tease?
What they pay me the big bucks for, Brian. But in 2010, you think you're getting this style in a can?
No, God,
no. No, this is coming in a bottle every time. Could we have shipped this across the country in bottles the way we did? Probably not.
I don't think bottles will fit in this box.
That's very astute of you.
Cool.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite monk? Mine's Tony Shalhoub.
Oh, you're the other worst. And much like OCD TV show detectives, monks have a key role in this style of beer.
I've got to say, I am so excited to hear how you're going to connect a syndicated detective TV show and the role of monks in this style of beer.
Yes. Hear me out. So one of the important contributions of monks to the brewing industry is in their relentless pursuit of cleanliness in both the brewing process and the brewery overall. So.
Okay. Yeah. And another Breaking Bad reference we can even tie in here, the Fly episode.
Yes. A very polarizing episode that a lot of people don't like, but I think is phenomenal.
But yeah,
yes.
it's super important whether you're making whatever they made in Breaking Bad or if you're making beer. So when did this process start? When did monks sort of get into this style?
So I have my notes here because I was a little unprepared this morning, after last night's festivities. So Todd, this story began a long time ago. And much like an episode of your favorite neurotic detective show, I'd like to title this segment, Mr. Monk in the Role of Saint Benedict.
You do you. Let's hear it. I'm in.
Let's do it. Okay, so the role was like a temple for monastic life that was written by Benedict of Nursia around the 6th century and included a directive that monks should earn their own keep and make donations to the poor out of whatever they create. So the monks made many things, cheese, honey, and most importantly, beer. So the monks took beer very seriously. It was their way to show hospitality to the poor in their communities and travelers that might be visiting their local areas.
So you mean to tell me this is like before GoFundMe, monks were just making stuff and giving it to the poor in their community. This was their sort of they felt it as a pull to the community. It was like what they were compelled to do and felt was their
Yeah, they had, a servitude to their religion, to God, but also they thought that they should play a role in serving their communities as both ambassadors to outside travelers and as champions of the poor. Chat, you all seem like very charitable people. Let me know if you've ever donated a beer to a wary traveler or the less fortunate, maybe. So, because beer was safer to drink than water, Todd, comment?
Someone said that in the chat.
Oh,
Andrew.
Who is that?
Andrew. He wrote, I hear that back in the day, beer was safer to drink than water.
Beer was safer to drink than water. They didn't have reliable means of like sanitizing and sterilizing water. So beer was the safer alternative. So the offering of beer to travelers was seen as one of the most hospitable things that the monks could do. And a tradition that still lives on today through the very simple phrase, hey, thanks for stopping by. You want a beer?
Today around noon, I would have said no, but like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And especially if it's a safety issue, it's like, if you're a weary traveler, you're probably not going to be excited about the prospect of being offered a glass of water because you have no idea if it's going to infect you. Yeah, thanks. I would love to get sick,
Yes, I would love to die from drinking this thing that's supposed to help me. And
it's nourishing, as Patrick said.
Yeah, or nourishment as well. Yeah. So lots of monks of different monks brewed throughout the world. Most well known are Belgian monks. However, there's monks all throughout the world. And the Belgian monks who became most well known for brewing beer were known as Trappist monks, and they were named after La Trappe Abbey, this order of, what did they call themselves? The Order of Cistercians of Strict Observance. Can't read tonight. Or we'll just call them OSCO for short. It dates all the way back to 1098. So before, question for the chat. Do you know the only brewery that is still in existence that was open in 1098? Question for the chat. Only brewery that is still open that was in existence in 1098. Not Chimay. Not Chimay. Germany would be a hint. St. Bernardus, a very, very good guess, but not true as well. Todd, do you have any guesses?
I was gonna guess an American company, but I was gonna be wrong. Someone got it though.
Two people got it. Liana and Andrew. Weinheim-Stefan. The brewery was founded in 1040, and in 2040 they will celebrate their 1,000-year anniversary coming up in a short 19 years. So
1,000-year anniversary.
1,000-year anniversary.
That's so impressive.
Yeah. But those are Germans. We're talking about Belgian monks right now. So this isn't going to turn into a religious history, but from 1098 to a certain time later on, the order was very much destroyed, pretty much. There was only a couple of these kind of strict observance monks left, and they were struggling very, very badly. So most monks took their lead at the time from La Grande Trappe Abbey and then became known as Trappist monks. One of the ways that they got themselves back into, good fortunes was by selling beer. And Trappist monks are responsible for many of the modern advancements in brewing technique and technology. Most notable, I'm sure, Todd, you've heard of quads, tripels, doubles, singles, maybe not. Yeah.
I think those are probably probably the least recognizable of those styles. I think you can get the other three at most like entry-level craft beer bars.
Yeah. Any brewery that has a focus on brewing Belgian styles are going to brew one, if not all three of those styles. And any bar that has a focus on Belgian beers or just craft beer will have one, if not all three of those styles. But this could date back to the monks, originating from them. They discovered that you could run water through grains multiple times to get more beer from them. So the first runnings, this is kind of known as party guiling. It becomes known as party guiling in UK. I don't know why. Party is spelled with an I, so it has some kind of distinction. It's not just like party brewing. But so the this would allow the monks to get really rich, high alcohol beer from the first runnings. And this was the beer that they would sell for a profit. They found out that people would pay higher money for higher alcohol beers, more rich, more dense beers. And these would be the beers they would sell. And this is how they would mainly fund their monasteries, and how this specific order of monks came back into prominence after almost being completely destroyed.
It's incredible to think about it, because that concept of, when Brian's referring to the first runnings, that's the first time that the water is going through the grain, right? So
Yes,
we're talking about like business process improvements, right? That monks have this sort of knack for capitalism and like really achieving like efficiency. And it's really interesting because in the US, there's one Trappist brewery. It's in Spencer, Massachusetts. And there's this really interesting article where he's a monk, and he's sort of, there's some like conversation within the monastery about like him operating sort of a brewery, and he's having to make these same process improvements. He's hiring and firing people. Like in this interview, he's mentioning having key performance indicators, which is sort of not what you think of when you think of monks. You sort of thinking like this is, you think of them taking vows of silence and being very like solemn, but we're talking about being creative and smart and knowing what the community needs, which I love.
They were very much in tap with, no pun intended, with what the community needed. They needed
alcohol, baby.
Yeah, they were of the people.
That sweet, sweet booze.
Yeah. I don't know how far I want to go with this joke, but much like capitalists, they would give the worst beer to the poor people.
I think people can draw their own conclusion from that stem of a sentence you've made, Brian.
Yes, that half of a thought that I just put together. So what they figured out actually was that they second runnings would be slower, slightly lower alcohol, and that's what they would drink on a daily basis. And I made the joke about giving the beer to the poor, but actually, like we mentioned earlier, beer was safer to drink, so they gave the lowest alcohol content beer to the poor, who had no other means of hydration safely. So this beer that was low, and I make jokes about being the lowest quality,
when you're
became
saying
their
low,
main source of hydration.
When you're saying low ABV, we're talking like 3%, right?
No, we're talking like 1,
See,
2.
That's the important distinction. This is essentially water that has nutrients and enough alcohol to kill germs. Right? Calling it's beer because of the ingredients, but
and
it's not gonna taste like this.
Not to get too nerdy, but there's pH changes that happen when you brew beer, especially during the mashing process, and that will stop bacteria from growing in there, even more so than the alcohol will. So, that was a very good thing that they did. That would help them, continue their community and help out the least fortunate in their communities. And I had a joke that I wanted to go into, and I completely forgot it.
Listen. If there's a day that you're allowed to forget jokes, like, I'm happy you showed up.
Yeah. Oh, here's my point. So those terms, single, double, triple, actually came from the monks eventually measuring sugar content in those beers. So the sugar content of the triple was 3 times more after doing the runnings than the single, and the double was 2 times more. So hence the names single, double, triple. Eventually, they, through more process changes, more equipment changes, especially, they got up to a quad, which was the biggest, richest beer possible. And nowadays is beers that are over 10, 11, 12% alcohol. And then that allowed them to party guile 3 times. So they would get 4 batches of beer out of 1 batch of malt, out of 1 batch of ingredients, basically.
It's efficient, it's creative, it's consumer focused, like all of these great things that like now we so much take for granted. Like if you go to a local liquor store, you can basically spew off any 6 flavors you want to taste at a wild range of ABVs, and they'll exist. But back then, if you were a consumer and you were like, listen, up the ABV, let me hear it. Who are you going to tell that to? Monks? Like, no, you're just going to drink what's there. So it was very, very, very smart because it's obviously stood the test of time. We're talking about a 1,000-year anniversary.
Yeah, good question in the Q&A that I wanted to answer from Liana. We got a lot going on tonight, Liana. You're throwing out great points. You got a great question here. What's Belgian table beer? Todd, do you know what Belgian table beer is?
It's the low stuff.
It is. It's the low stuff, specifically of the farmers. So another thing I wanted to get into is Belgium is the only country where all of the beers from that country are referred to just as Belgian beers. You don't get a Hefeweizen and people say, oh, did you order a German beer? Is that one of them German beers? People just lump all Belgian beers in together. Yep. And there's wide varieties of styles in Belgium. Table beers taste nothing like lambics, and lambics taste nothing like doubles.
True.
The main constant throughout those beers, though, is the role of yeast in creating the flavors that are so commonly associated with those beers. And that's kind of why you can forgive people for calling all beers from Belgium just, oh, that's a Belgian beer. And that's the style that they think it is, rather than looking and saying, oh, that's a lambic, that's a kriek, that's a Dubbel, that's a triple.
And I don't know if you're planning on getting into this, but this seems like a good way to get into Z-Man's question about how they cultivate these yeasts. His question says, how do they cultivate yeast? They wanted to give a specific result, but yeah, like how if we're lumping Belgium into a beer square, how are they keeping their yeast flavors similar? How are they cultivating those strains?
Well, first, I'm very disappointed that you didn't use the term beer box.
I'll be honest, my beer boxes in the garage. I live in Vermont. It's how to keep it cold.
But I want to finish up on Liana's question. So table beer was the single beer for the farmer's beer. And the predominant beer that the farmers brewed was a beer known as Saison, aka farmhouse ale. So their farmhouse ales were their big beers. Those were their adult beers. And table beers were the little 2.5% beers that were done from the second runnings that they would serve to children at the dinner table. Hence the name table beers. So, and then to jump to Z-Man's question, it's simple trial, not trial and error. What's the word I'm looking for?
Experimentation,
yeah, but they would just throw out the beers that they didn't like. When brewers used to brew, they didn't know that yeast played such a big role, but they knew when they added some of the old beer that went successfully into the new beer would turn into something similar to the old beer. They didn't know that they were throwing the yeast cultures, the bacterias in there, and that's what was driving the main character of their style of beer. So if they got something that they didn't like, they'd drink that beer, they wouldn't use it to reproduce another beer, and then therefore that strain of yeast or that strain of bacteria would not die off, but would cease to be used to brew beer.
It's almost like breeding.
Yes, this process of selection.
Yep.
Unnatural selection, kind of guiding what they want out of these yeasts by selecting the ones that give them what they want. It's, they're playing the role of nature, essentially. So.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, yeah, it's great when it's yeast so they save some of the yeast to see if they want to use it again. So that Z-Man's follow question is, so they save some of the yeast to see if they want to use it again. Yes and no. They did it sort of accidentally. Microbiology didn't exist as a course you could take in college in the year 1098. They knew that something was happening with their old beer, but what we know is that there's yeast in it.
Yeah.
And that's what was driving the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jason said, like herd selection in cattle. Exactly. Yeah, you choose the ones that give you the that what you want and that are going to perform for you, essentially. Somebody else mentioned the Brewers Paddle, which is another thing. They had a wooden paddle that they would use to stir the fermenting beer, and wood is porous, so naturally the yeast would get stuck in the fibers in there, and then they would stick that paddle back in there.
When we go down the yeast rabbit hole, I always get a little bit grossed out because there's yeast everywhere, and it's such a naturally occurring substance. And it just when we're talking about the cleanliness of the brewery, like yeast is sort of the exception because it like is sort of around everything, and it was on this paddle that they were just reusing. Like little did they know, but
Yeah. And most people probably don't realize this, but most historic beers had some degree of sourness to them as they would age. There was no way to select out, okay, we're just going to use this yeast. Whatever is in the area, that's what got into your beer. And that's why style is developed in certain regions, because different yeasts were native to those regions.
Yep.
To go back to the farmers, one of the reasons their beers got so characteristic and so just continual is because they would brew them in their farmhouse, which was made out of wood. The bacteria cultures, the yeast cultures would get up into that wood. And then whenever the hot wort would get in there again, that hot beer that was cooling down, the steam would loosen up the fibers in the wood. It would reignite the life of those microcultures, those microbes, and they would fall down into the beer. This is a process known as spontaneous fermentation and is most commonly associated with lambics, but was used for pretty much most of beer brewing at one time, before Louis Pasteur discovered yeast in the mid 1800s. But that is a very long story for another time. Todd, unless you got some comments to make from the chat, I want to give people some idea of, I think you mentioned this, a single. What the heck is a single? Let's talk about a single. I also want to hear from the chat favorite Belgian beers. I heard some love for Saisons. I heard some love for a little bit for a Saison in particularly called Sweet Caroline, but let's hear your favorite Belgian beers in the chat. Mine is a lambic. And
is there a particular lambic that you're obsessed about, Brian, and you'll buy at any moment's notice that you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, Cantillon Goose is the ultimate goose lambic. But
Brian's obsessed. I just want the chat to know this. Like, I want you all to like understand Brian's like affinity for Cantillon is strong.
Second to only my affinity for Hill Farmstead, maybe, which we'll get into maybe another day. But lots of love for Chimay, lots of love for Delirium Tremens. I feel like Delirium Tremens was like a really early bridge beer for a lot of people getting into Belgian beer. So somebody had Delirium,
the coolest bottles.
Yeah, the clay wax embossing
and
or whatever it is.
Colorful foil on the top. It's genius. From a branding perspective, it's incredible. Super great. And it's delicious. That also helps any beer.
There's so many good beers people are throwing out in here. Roquefort 10, Duvel, Tripel Carmeliet, Grosch. Grosch, I believe, is, I don't know what I think Grosch is. Yeah, there you go, Chad or Todd. Look it up. Thank you, chat.
How did you know I was?
So there's one that I did see in there. Roquefort 10. Roquefort's a perfect example of a Duvel. Roquefort 6 is a perfect Belgian example of a Duvel, the style we're drinking tonight. One other thing I wanted to point out is you'll probably see Abbey and Trappist, those terms used a lot in commonality and almost synonymously. They are not, however. Trappist monks actually branded together in 1997. There was 8 different monasteries throughout the world that branded together, and they formed something called the International Trappist Association. And they made this special little logo. And I know you've seen it if you've seen a case of Delirium or Chimay. And it's only given to authentic Trappist products. And they have 4 things that they have to follow for them to be official Trappist products. But basically, Abbeys are Trappist-style beers not brewed by Trappist monks. So if you're looking for authentic Trappist beer, you have to look for that red like badge that you'll see on the side of the Chimay case, and that's what you're looking for. So that's
like the brewery in Spencer, Massachusetts, they have that.
Yes. I already mentioned Chimay. Roquefort is another good one. Westmalle or Westmalle, correct me, chat, if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Of course, Orval, the original all Brett beer that everybody. Orval Day is a great day every year to go out and try some old Orval. And then Westy, which Michael Jackson, the beer hunter, not the dancer, singer, performer, called the best beer in the world. Westy 12, their quad. Michael Jackson drank more beer than anybody, reviewed more beer than anybody, got more people into beer than anybody, said that Westy 12, a Belgian quad produced at an authentic Trappist brewery, was the best beer in the world. And still, people will say it is one of the rarest beers and the most highly sought after beers in the world. So
that's super impressive. What a thing to be able to say.
How many total Trappist breweries are there with the official seal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My count is 5 on here. I could be incorrect.
I think it's more than that.
What was that?
I think it's a little more than that. I think it's closer to 10 or 11.
It might be. Yeah, I just have very short notes here.
It's fine.
Yeah, so that's why this is called an Abbey Dubbel rather than a Trappist Dubbel, or just a plain Belgian Dubbel. I think they wanted to pay homage to these important brewers, that changed beer.
Decidedly not monks at Flying Fish.
Definitely not monks.
Lovely people, very creative.
Maybe some people with OCD. That's a callback.
Shout out to Tony Shalhoub. Maybe he'll join us.
Z-Man says, so they didn't know yeast had to do with brewing. To say they didn't know it, I think would be outright incorrect. I think they knew something was happening in there. Like, we didn't have microscopes until the 1800s, I think. So if somebody's smarter, correct me, please. But they really didn't realize how important it was and how important, not to go down a rabbit hole, but yeast is a living, breathing organism. So temperature changes in fermentation is going to produce different beers, different health of the yeast, different amount of the yeast. It is the most important ingredient in beer. And when they found this out, there was a revolution in brewing quality all throughout the mid 1800s, not to go completely off the rails and go into US beer history, but beer got better in America and the beer industry got stronger in America because of the focus on yeast. Beer is 13,000 years or older, but it really only became the beverage that we know with this cleanliness and consistency and very scientific focus in the past 200 years, something like that.
And what's wild too is like from a grain to glass perspective, knowing things about yeast makes it so that you can make an IPA now in a week or 3 days in some cases. They're like, this is yeast specific knowledge that you don't have to throw these huge barrels in caves and let it sit there, and ferment for weeks at a time. Knowing yeast has let us get beer faster and more consistently. So super, super important there.
Okay. What yeast strand was used for the beer we are drinking from Patrick in the Q&A? I don't know. That's something we would have to contact Flying Fish about. Most likely a pretty common Belgian yeast strain.
Yeah.
If it's the White Labs equivalent, I think would be 550, which is like their standard. Barry, if you're in the chat, please correct me. I know you know probably better than I do. But yeah, I think 500. It's probably just the standard Belgian strain. It's not super, super characterful in this beer. Like I said, it is definitely helping to produce that cherry, but it's not something like I think a Tripel would have a much more expressive, flavorful yeast in it, where you're getting those high esters of banana and those fruity characters in there. There's more over-the-top fruity characters.
You know who I bet could tell you about the yeast in this beer?
Who?
Tony Shalhoub. The callback? Is that how we're doing this now?
I liked it. I liked it. That's good.
It'll play.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, we're going really far into the yeast because that's something I like talking about. But Bill said some old breweries really try to keep tight rein on their yeast, and they did. A famous story to tie in Vermont, where Todd lives, an awesome place.
Someone shouted out Hermit Thrushes. I missed it. It might have been Bill, actually. Hermit Thrushes quad. So
that's an excellent brewery, and a brewery that puts all of their beers in cans to do another callback.
Look at us.
Yeah, but famously, Hetty Topper, Alchemist Brewery, kept very tight lid on their yeast, and it is actually said that the lab that originally cultured up their strain, which is now sold as Vermont yeast, or will sometimes be called Conan yeast, was actually taken from a can of Heady Topper, that lab technicians like extracted the yeast from that can so that they could take that yeast and grow it up and then sell it commercially, rather than John just being like, hey, here's my yeast, you can, pay me a fee for it, and you can produce it. So
It's actually
kind
the
of some
plot of
rogue
Mission
yeast.
Impossible 11.
Yeah.
Is like the yeast extraction movie. That's if true, that is an absolutely outrageous story.
I believe it is true. I'm saying it like it's true. Kind of, yeah.
True.
Caitlin, yeah, kind of. They did kind of steal the yeast. Although yeast is, we're not going to get into legality of it, but I don't think you could copyright yeast.
Yeah, and you like buy it when you get the beer, so it's like yours.
Patent it. You patent.
Who knows?
We're getting off the rails. So
we're gone.
Yep. Todd, I think it's time.
Yeah.
I hope you had fun tonight. Maybe learn something.
I learned a couple things. I love referencing the TV show Monk. We actually wrote tonight's blog is all about the show Monk. It's my 12 favorite episodes.
We're not doing this. The blog tonight was written by a very handsome young man, smart, intelligent young man named Brian, and is all about yeast and what they do for beer. So head over to citybrewtours.com/Christmas to learn more about Saccharomyces. Do I look like I'm in Men in Black?
Yeah, like the copy you buy at a flea market that someone recorded from the theater and then like cut in a bunch of their old home videos.
Yeah, here's my this is my thing that like I make you forget your memory.
Yeah. All right. Brian.
Terrible joke. No,
we'll
somebody
be back tomorrow.
No, somebody made a very good comment. Who is it? Steve? Yes, Steve said Diamond versus Chakrabarti. U.S. Supreme Court says you can patent living organisms. So maybe John Kimmick at The Alchemist has a case. Who knows?
It's true. All right. So we'll be back 8:00 tomorrow. The tease for tomorrow. We are talking to someone who has a PhD in the history of beer. This is one of the more interesting individuals I know. And we're going to be talking about the beer for tomorrow with him. It's a great, great honor to be able to do that with him. Very cool.
Yeah, sure. Another wonderful beer for night number 9. These first 8 nights have been great. We can't say enough thanks to everybody that's been joining us every night, everybody that joined us last night to celebrate New Year's Eve, everybody that made it back tonight. Todd, congratulations yourself for making it back tonight. Congratulations.
I'm going directly to sleep, for the record. Like, I'm going directly to sleep. Thanks for everyone showing up. We'll see you tomorrow night.
See ya.